everyone, it's Ted from Consumer Cellular, the guy in the orange sweater, and this is your wake-up call. If you're paying too much for wireless service, you don't have to keep having that nightmare. Consumer Cellular has the same fast, reliable coverage as the leading carriers for up to half the cost. So why keep spending more than you have to? Seriously, wake up and call 1-888-FREEDOM or visit consumercellular.com.
Savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single line 1, 5, and 10 gig data plans with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plans offered by T-Mobile and Verizon January 2024.
Have you found the keys to unlock your best trip? On a Trafalgar tour, you unlock more than just the world. We give you the key to let down your walls and make lifelong friends. The key to discovering hidden talents and fresh perspectives. From one-of-a-kind experiences to iconic destinations, Trafalgar gives you the keys to unlock your best self. Discover more at trafalgar.com/unlock. That's TRAFALGAR.com/unlock. Tour differently.
How's it going, and welcome to episode 44 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at OnTheWirePod, and of course, if you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews like Spotify does now, please take a second to let us know what you think. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out, and I am once again joined by Kevin Hastings, who should be followed on the Twitter at HastingKevin. Hey, Kevin, it's nice to have you back on the pod. I can't believe you missed out on the last episode. What happened, man?
Yeah, I know. I get off work and there's a text message from you that we did an impromptu pod, and then I got to listen to it right away the next morning. And the thing I was most upset about was I just missed the fun of talking baseball with you and Nick for an hour and a half. It was awesome, man.
It was interesting. Yeah. And Nick was like, hey, let's just talk, let's talk about one of your drafts that you guys just did. I'm like, that sounds great. And then it turned into him just talking about my part of the draft. And I'm like, all right, no, let's talk about somebody else's picks. But that was a ton of fun. Great little impromptu thing. And hopefully who knows? We'll see if some more of those pop up. And we like to try to keep it as, organized as possible. That one was not. But you know what? That's the fun of it sometimes.
Exactly.
Kevin, I think the term out there in the wild right now, especially in November and December, was always be drafting. Mm-hmm. And we just jumped into a new draft, the Battle of the Pods draft. They expanded that. Zach Waxman put that together, and we are in the second league of that. So that is going full force. I think we're in round 3 right now. Hopefully we'll see if my pick comes up during the pod. But we are in the thick of draft season, believe it or not, of course. And the one thing that's different between drafting in late January compared to previous seasons is that there's no news coming out at all that's going to sway player ADP beyond the random deep league flyer like Gregory Polanco signing overseas. And shout out to Chris Clegg out there on Twitter for reminding everyone the other day of that news, because according to a couple of draft results in January, there's some people out there that didn't know that.
Yeah,
he's still being drafted. So Chris, well done on that, letting everybody know. We haven't been able to get any other big news about any signings that we typically see in December or January at this time of year, of course, because of the lockout that may push a player up or down in rankings in draft lists. And the one thing, though, that we can still rely on that's still coming out that will undoubtedly have a profound impact on ADP rankings and the general discussion and Twitter conversations are player projections. Obviously, Steamer came out, a couple months ago. Some other projections out there, paid projections have come out recently. And now we have Zips has been trickling out. Right now, we are able to follow the ATC projections along with the BAT and the BAT X just came out on Fangraphs as well on the player pages. ATC, though, is what we're going to focus on mostly today. ATC stands for the average total cost, and just so happens to be the initials of the creator and our guest today, Mr. Ariel Cohen, with all the Fantasy Sports Raters Association or the FSWA award finalists being announced last week. It's timely to remind everyone that Ariel himself is a multiple FSWA award winner, including the 2019 Baseball Writer of the Year and author of the 2020 Baseball Article of the Year. Ariel also writes regularly over at Rotographs, CBS Sports, Sportsline, Rotoballer, and is the host of the Beat the Shift podcast. It's at beat_shift_pod Ariel, you got to think about getting rid of those underscores. That's
boy.
that's difficult. But make sure you are following that and listening to the show on a regular basis if you're not already. Ariel participates in both labor and tout and has the tout championship in his trophy case to show for it. Ariel, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. How are things going for you now that your projections are finally out in the wild for everybody to see, and you're probably not getting bugged about it as much as you were leading up to it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. And second of all, thank you for that absolutely lovely intro. That's so nice of you. Very kind to me. But hey, it was a busy couple of weeks getting the ATC projections out there. And now it's time for me just to relax and go to Hawaii. No, now's when the fun starts. Now's when we start digging into it, getting ready for the season, seeing what the projections say. It was a mad dash just to get out the math. And I'm getting messages from people, hey, ATC really likes this guy. And I don't even know that because I'm just starting to dive in myself. Yeah, I'm doing it with everybody. It's a great community. I'm having fun here.
That's good. That's good to know. That's you really just like you put that together, you spit it out, and you're like, it's like you wrote a book but didn't remember any of the words that you wrote. So you're like, all right, now I need to read it.
It's an algorithm that I have, and it's not me. Ariel Cohen, the analyst, is not the ATC projections. That's an algorithm here. And then it's, of course, my job as the analyst. And I'm separating the two. I'm the projections guy, but I'm also the analyst. And now I have to see, okay, do I agree with some of these projections? Do I not? In general, with projections, you want to agree with them more than you don't, right? You don't want to go very far off projections. Even if you say, I really like this guy, well, don't change the projections all that much. But hey, I have an eye myself. If I know, I think the projections really discount a player because he was injured last year and the projections really don't bake that in. Me as the analyst can say that's something that has to improve in projections. So that's where I stand with that, I think.
That's good to know. I think we're going to dive into that a little bit more, get your take on exactly what those projections mean after they're going out. How much human element do you put into it yourself? Before that, we're gonna jump into a segment that we did a lot in the preseason last year, and I think we've gotten far enough into draft season where we have enough ADP and enough information that we can bring it back. Is our moving target section. So this is where we're all going to pick a player or two, or maybe more. These are targets that you think you would be making if you were in the 28th, 29th, 30th round of a typical fab league, whether it be a 12-teamer or 15-teamer. And these are the types of players that you would be choosing to use your last couple picks on. Usually they're darts. Usually they're, especially at this time of the season when you're making these drafts and we still have a couple of months, hopefully not too many months until opening day. Anything can change. They can be an easy drop. So there's not a lot of risk, obviously, in these types of picks. And all these players, as I told you guys, they should be going currently past ADP of 350. And that can be pretty much overall. I tend to typically look at draft champions, ADP to get that number. But really, overall, if you're going past 350, you're probably going past 350 almost everywhere for the most part. Kevin, I'm gonna push it over to you first. I said I was gonna go first, but I'm not. I'm gonna push it on to Kevin to see if you've got. I know you tweeted out. I think you're gonna pick one of these guys. You tweeted out something a couple days ago or about a week ago. I think me and Nick talked about it very briefly on the last pod. But I'm curious to see if you are gonna pick that player or if you're gonna go in a different direction.
No, I did pick that player. I used ADP of the draft champions leagues over the past month and did that today. So in that case, he's sitting at the 434th player off the board at this point. A wide range though, his min is 342 with a max of 497. So 150 pick range of where he's being taken. And that's Seth Brown of the Oakland Athletics. With Ariel here, I pulled the ATC projections today. 435 plate appearances. That was the first number I wanted to look at is the plate appearance projection. 20 home runs, 5 stolen bases, a little over 50 RBI and runs scored. For 435 plate appearances, that's great. What is not great is the 228 batting average that is projected. His career batting average at the MLB level and 380 some plate appearances is about that range. But when I was looking back at his minor league numbers from 2017 to 2019, high A, double A, triple A, all three of those seasons, his strikeout rate was 25%, and he hit for 270, 283, and 297 in those seasons. In his 83 plate appearances that he did get in a cup of coffee in 2019, his strikeout rate was 27%, and he hit 293. Now, that was fueled by a very high BABIP that season. But in 2021, when he struck out 29% of the time, he only had a 230 BABIP, leading to that 214 batting average. It really looks like when you look even deeper into his profile, he hits the crap out of fastballs, but it was figured out that he cannot hit breaking pitches and off-speed pitches. Well below 200 batting average on both. So if he can make that adjustment, the improvement in batting average may come. But the best part of Seth Brown, in my opinion, for this type of pick at this time of year, is that the Oakland A's are one of 12 teams that play 4 games opening weekend. Then they have 6 games in week 2 and 7 games in week 3 and 4. There's quite a few teams with kind of sparse schedules early in the season. So this is the kind of guy that you can get in the last round or two that can help you out, especially in NFBC formats where you're splitting the week, and a lot of teams have Monday and Thursday off in the first couple of weeks of the season, and you got a guy that's playing 4 days.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part for me, especially these last couple picks, is that if you can get a guy that you know is going to get your ABs up, or your innings pitched up at the beginning, you don't worry. I'm not worried about that average at all. Like, I'm not worried about it's not going to tank me, because I don't expect Seth Brown to be on my team past April in this scenario. But if you can get somebody that can, especially if you've got somebody that can play in 3 or 4 of those first week, there's only 4 days in the first week, and you want to get really more granular. The season starts on Thursday. You can switch out your hitters in an NFBC format.
Yeah, everybody plays
Friday.
on Thursday. He won't be in my lineup that day.
Yeah, exactly. You get a full weekend out of him.
And the only problem with Seth Brown, though, is he seems to be like a platoon player, like a strong side platoon player. His WRC plus last year against lefties was 42. That means he's 60% worse than the league average player as a lefty. So if in a daily league, he's a lot stronger. In a weekly league, it really depends on who's throwing. If you have a string of lefties, you would not want him in your lineup. So that's the only thing to be wary about him. But in terms of overall value, yeah, he projects as like in a 15 team as a good bench player on the whole right now, according to ATC. Just be cognizant of the format and the schedule.
Yeah, it's a good point. Bringing in those daily moves leagues, then you have a lot more flexibility and when you can put them in and when you can't put them in. So good call on that. I'm going to throw out a pair of guys, only 2 guys I'm going to talk about. And I think this is against the grain of what you're thinking about. I think at the end of a draft, you're typically not going after your catcher. More than likely, you feel comfortable with the 2 catchers you already have, and you're definitely in a fab league. It's very rare that you're actually picking a 3rd catcher, unless you have even a Tyler Stevenson who you think is going to play every day, and you can switch him into first base for whatever reason. And then you want 2 other catchers. So the 2 guys I want to talk about, there are 2 guys that I picked up in my most recent fab league, in the listener league. Ian Gomes of the Cubs, currently backing up Contreras. And then MJ Melendez, who I feel like I'm probably talking about more than anybody, even more than Kevin, who's the Royals fan on the show. So I paired these 2 guys together, and I'll be the first one to tell you that there's more risk in pairing these 2 guys. It doesn't make a lot of sense to pair these 2 guys, because I'm picking Ian Gomes in the off chance that Contreras does get traded out of Chicago and Gomes goes into the starting. That's the obvious play here. Even if he does, Gomes isn't going to be the type of guy that I could see myself streaming him in and out of my lineup throughout the season, especially in a 12-teamer, 15-teamer. If he's the starting catcher in Chicago, he's probably still going to be in my lineup. But I think going over to the Steamer 600, he's still only going to be projected to hit, I think, like 16 home runs in only 50 some odd runs, 50 some odd RBI. So even with 600 at bats or plate appearances, he's not exactly going to be a powerhouse in my lineup. But that's that upside that you get in that last pick, especially if you waited a really long time on catcher. You didn't go after the Sal Perez's, you didn't go after the Will Smiths early on in your drafts. That upside is still there if he can move into that starting role in Chicago. And then MJ Melendez, I'm just going to bring it up again. Kevin, is Sam Gallagher keeping Melendez back past the month of April, where Melendez can come in and become, at the very least, the backup catcher, with the possibility, as we've talked about and heard, of filling in the gap at third base every once in a while, moving around the diamond. Adam Lawler was in that draft with us, and he mentioned, he had similar ideas with Melendez. Try to talk me out of this so I don't bring him up anymore.
I would love to see that as much as anybody would, but he's not going to be the backup catcher unless they can get him those other at-bats as well. And right now, the way the Royals roster stands, it's too crowded. There's not room for him. And so I don't see that scenario playing out unless there's injuries, unless there's the Whit Merrifield trade that's been talked about for 4 seasons. Unless some of these
that's a couple
things,
years long. Yeah.
Unless some of these things take place, I don't see him moving around the diamond thing playing out. And he's going to get everyday at bats, whether it's in Kansas City or Omaha.
Yeah, you might have finally gotten through to me. Maybe we'll find out next episode, or maybe this will just be the
I hope it works out for you as a Royals fan. I want to see this happen.
Luckily, I don't think I have many shares of Melendez. I think I might have 2 in 2 DCs, and then this one in the Fab. In the Fab one, I don't mind, especially this league that I'm talking about specifically, because I drafted, as I mentioned in the last episode, way too many prospects in this league. I will be dropping a good majority of them within the first couple of weeks. And then at the very least, it's NFBC. They'll be available on the wire to be bid on even before they get called up because I drafted them. So you're welcome, right, rest of the league. So that they have me to thank for that one. But I still like the Yan Gomes play, especially if you waited a long time on catcher this time of year. As we get closer into spring training, I don't like the pick nearly as much because there's what's going to happen as we get closer and closer to the season. If I know Yan Gomes is not going to be, there's less of a possibility of him being the starting catcher on a team, especially with a guy like a talent with Contreras there. Like, I'm not taking the chance that a trade happens in season for that. It doesn't make any sense. So I like Gomes at this point in draft season, not so much in March.
Yeah, Yan Gomes will get there. He's a veteran. He always gets some value for a second catcher. I think it can't hurt you. Melendez, though, I don't know. I don't have interest much in prospects. Nevertheless, a guy who's going to compete with Salvador Perez to catch. Salvador Perez had 665 plate appearances last year. He's the highest of any catcher. The second highest was 537 by Real Muto. I mean, Perez does DH a fair couple, but I can't see Melendez really getting playing time, and you're going to draft him and you're going to hold him and you're going to say, what the heck am I holding on to him for? I would pass on that. But Gomes, sure, if you need a second catcher, why not?
I'm curious. I'm looking it up right now. How many games, Kevin, you probably know better than anybody, did Perez DH last year versus actually catching?
I want to say, and I could look really quick, but I do believe he caught about 120.
Yeah. So he started at catcher for 120 games.
Yep.
And so he had the total 160 games last year, right?
Yeah,
161. So he played Ariel, like you said, he played a fair amount at catcher. He wasn't so much being pushed into DH. And then, Kevin, you said this on a previous pod. You've got a lot of other DH candidates in Kansas City moving around that roster. Those opportunities probably are not going to be, they're going to be far and few between. All right. So Ariel, go ahead and pick and choose from your list, and curious to see which direction you end up going in.
I'm just going to name 3 relievers, actually, who you might consider if your last pick. In no particular order: Pierce Johnson, Anthony Bender, and Chad Green. Pierce Johnson, right now, he could be in line to be the closer in San Diego. Hard to pass up on a closer with your last dart in draft. And, hey, he could have 20 saves, maybe he has 10, but he might be the guy to start. And if not, he's a pretty good closer anyways, good strikeout rate. I don't love his walk rate, which is really the only issue, but that comes together, then we're looking actually a fine reliever and definitely worth your last pick. Anthony Bender in Miami, also very solid pitcher. He had a couple saves last year. He could get a share of the saves. I don't know if the Marlins are going to have one closer. Flora was good, but you never know for a last pick. Hey, why not? You just stick him around. And how about Chad Green? Chad Green is a fantastic middle reliever. Is Chapman the closer? Probably. Is he super, super stable? Maybe, but Chad Green has ended up getting a bunch of saves every single year. If he has a dark spell like he did Chapman, or he gets injured, he's older Chapman. And even if not, Chad Green has amazing strikeout rates and amazing ratios. I mean, his whip last year, 0.88. I don't care if you're a closer or not. When you have 84 innings worth of 0.88 whip, that moves the dial. So he's worth it to roster. And if I don't know who the good starters are in a given year, I just draft an extra middle reliever with my last pick and start him the first 2 weeks because I know they'll be decent. That's what I tend to do. So why not make it Chad Green? I very often will either a speculative closer or a good middle reliever. That's somebody really who you can really benefit from doing in your last pick. So I'd go with one of those three.
Yeah, these three, I'm much more of a fan of the Chad Green for all the points you mentioned. He's definitely not going to hurt you anywhere unless he has like a blow up here once and again. And that happens with Chad Green, and you get past it and you realize, all right, he's going to be good more often than not. And so even if he's not walking in or backing himself into those save opportunities, he's helping you in the other categories, like you mentioned. I've started to sway away from Bender. I was a big Bender fan going as I started my drafts. I started swaying, and it mostly had to do with Greg Jewett's comments about Craig Mish also saying that more than likely he expects the Marlins to go out and get a mid-tier free agent closer like a Colomé or an Ian Kennedy or what have you to fill that role, whether it's a one-year deal where they are able to then trade them at the deadline for prospects or just whatever reason.
Yeah, but they did that with Anthony Bass last year,
yes.
and then he didn't work out after they tried him for a week. I love Craig Mish, but maybe they get him, but they might just end up being a reliever in the bullpen.
Bender by far is the best reliever in that bullpen.
There's a probability. There's a probability he becomes the guy. So saves are scarce, and he's free. So that's right. Free is free.
Yeah. You don't get much better than that.
Right.
All right. And Kevin, I'll go back to you because you had a couple names on here. Is there anybody else that you wanted to highlight? You can save the other ones for the next episode.
I want to bring one other one up, and that's Tyler Wade, who is now with the Angels. And a friend of mine, Douglas Boyle, he's at Urban Baboon on Twitter. He brought this up to me in a conversation a couple weeks ago. He's, hey, Tyler Wade right now is the starting shortstop for the Angels. And I thought about it, and I went to Roster Resource, and they have him there. They have him as a strong side platoon guy on the strong side of a platoon for a guy that's being drafted as the 425th player off the board and who ATC projects for 20 stolen bases in only 283 plate appearances. Now, last season with the Yankees and throughout his career, he's averaged less than 1.5 plate appearances per game played. So defensive replacement and pinch runner at the end of a game. But that just means the 229 batting average doesn't hurt you because he's not getting plate appearances for a guy that is not going to be in my starting lineup on a weekly basis, but he qualifies at three positions, middle, corner, and outfield. And so at any time that I need someone to throw in for, I have that Monday, Thursday day off, Tyler Wade, get me a stolen base in these 4 days. It's worth a shot at that point in the draft.
I like that in most scenarios. I hate it when I do something like that and he gets me nothing. You had one job, Tyler Wade. You had one job and you couldn't do it. I like this a lot more in a 15-teamer than I do in a 12-teamer for obvious reasons. The replacement level on the wire is just, it's going to be at least equal to, so I'm not worried about him not being on my roster for that scenario. But yeah, it's a good call.
Oh, I forgot the best part. It's just like Seth Brown. Arizona
hold
has
on.
three
The best part is that
weeks,
it's just like Seth Brown.
Schedule-wise.
All right.
3 7-game weeks in the first 4 full games of the season. So he's going to be that guy you can use in that situation for the first month and then let him go.
Yeah. The nice thing about him, first of all, he's multi-eligible in positions. But the nice thing about him is if you take him, you can get a sense really quickly on what the Angels' plan for him is in terms of playing time. If they have a plan of you're just going to be a defensive replacement, well, you can cut him. And if not, you might have stumbled onto a 20 to 25 stolen base guy. So it's a good upside play. Any guy who's free, just take a stab at something.
Right.
It's you can only do good, and you just cut him if it's no good. I think the issue with taking Wade or anybody else at your last pick is just opportunity cost. Like, what's the best play here, right? Certainly, I think he's worthwhile to do it, but is there a better option or not? So definitely he should be on your list for considerations, especially if you have a team that's weak in stolen bases. Then, hey, maybe take a shot on him.
Yeah, that really sums up that last point you said, Ariel, is that these last picks really depend on how you've built out the rest of your roster. So we talked about it with Tanner Bell was on the show, and you highlighted it here, Ariel, with your selections. I'm a big fan of picking a bunch of relievers with your last couple picks, and hopefully one of those darts hits the balloon, wins you the prize. But if you paid up for 2 or even 3 capital C closers early in your draft, there are better opportunities for you to throw that dart at to possibly, hopefully, fill other gaps like Tyler Wade if you have a stolen base deficiency, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a good call out there. All right, now it's finally time to dive into the recently revealed 2022 ATC projections, and we will do just that right after this quick break.
Hey, Alex Fast here, and thanks for listening to this podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. If you're a fan, consider supporting all of us by getting a PL Plus subscription, where you're going to get an ad-free website and get access to our Discord, where you can talk to all of our podcast hosts and staff. Plus, you can hang out with our incredible Pitcher List community. It's basically a baseball sanctuary year-round for as low as $8 a month. You can sign up at pitcherlist.com/plus, and you're going to get your first month free with promo code podcast. Also, don't forget to check out everything else we do as well, from YouTube videos, live streams, newsletters, off-season articles, TikToks, breakdowns, over 15 baseball podcasts on our network. We can't stop talking about baseball even during the off-season. So sign up for PL Plus today at pitcherlist.com/plus and use promo code podcast to get your first month free. All right. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show.
All right, and so we're back, and we are here, of course, with Ariel Cohen, the creator of the ATC projections, which just went live on the Fangraph site, on all the player pages, and of course, you can look at all the projections itself on the ATC projection page on this past Thursday. As we're recording this on Monday night, the 24th of January. By the time this goes out, ATC will be out for about a week, and so we've had a full weekend to go through, comb through the entire projection system. Of course, every single player, every single number. We've all seen every single one by now. But I guess let's give our listeners kind of a brief synopsis of exactly what ATC is, how it came about, why'd you do it, and any other information that you can give about the projections and why it exists in the first place.
All right, because I was playing fantasy baseball in a home league, and we switched from draft to auction, and I don't know, who the heck do I know what to do, how to compute what auction value I should pay for a guy, but said, all right, let's dream of making a projection system, but I said, all right, I got to start with some projections, and I didn't know what the best one was, so I grabbed all of them, and I searched for any projection online that I could find, really, and I don't know, I averaged them all. What the heck does anybody else do? And it came up with something, and that it did well. I think I won my league in any case. But then I said the following year, maybe one projection is better than the other, or maybe it's better than the other for a certain statistic. Maybe one projection is better in stolen bases, and maybe one is better in home runs or pitcher strikeouts. So I did a historical experience analysis on the previous year, and I said, wait a minute, which projection picked was closer or did a better job of picking the right stat for that category? And I don't know. I basically ran some regressions, and it said, okay, the optimal thing that I should have done last year was take 10% of this projection for this statistic and 20% of this and 2% of this, and don't use this one for this, and whatever it came up to. And I said, all right, let's apply that to the year going forward to all these projections. And lo and behold, that projection system was better and more accurate than just a straight average one. And so I've basically used that principle for the past 10 years or 11 years or however long I'm doing this here. And just every year I get a little bit more data. I get more credible data. I refine my process a little bit to include, hey, the last 3 years, last 4 years. Every year I get more information, and I take a nice long average of what weight I should put for each projection system. And that's how it works. It's very similar to what's done with hurricanes. In a typical hurricane model, it actually takes a bunch of underlying models, and it says, all right, well, this one I should favor the North American model for wind speed, and this one I should favor for temperature the European model. And it blends a bunch of models together to come up with an even better model. And that's what I do here. And it worked. Lo and behold, it does work. I won a bunch of leagues. I started playing NFBC. I won my first 2 years. I think I stumbled onto something here. So that's the short story of how it goes and what's made of it.
Yeah, the fact that you've been doing it for over a decade now, and it's been successful for you, especially if you're using it as strictly as you may be. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But actually, Kevin, let me push that onto you. Like, how I think we've talked about projections as a general concept a couple times, but and I think you always say, listen, the projections are, no matter what we think, the projections are smarter than us. But how strictly are you adhering to these as they come out? And I know you've got an article in the works about comparing ADP, and we're going to talk about some comparisons to the ATC projections to current ADP later on in the show. Like, how strictly are you, and should other people, do you think, be utilizing these projections, especially like in ATC? Let's just stick on that one specifically.
I have really tried to get more and more strict each year the past several years. At First Pitch Arizona this year, Ariel was doing a live recording of Beat the Shift with Derek Carty as his guest. So obviously they're talking projections. And I asked them a question. If there was ever a scenario where they would go against their projection, and Derek Carty's response was, why would you want to? And I repeated the question, and he said the exact same thing. Why would you want to? And that's what that's really sunk into me. Now, Ariel made the stipulation there. If there's something going on where you think the plate appearances is going to vary to a substantial degree one way or another, that might be the instance where you would make that adjustment. But you're not really adjusting the projections in that instance. You're only adjusting the playing time, right? So that's really sunk into me. The other thing I will say about this is I hear if you go strictly by projections, you can expect to finish mid-pack. My response to that is no, because that would only be the case if everybody is, and everybody isn't. Like you just said, we all think we're smarter than the projections, and some people are, depending on their other Phil Dussault has his own algorithm, but that's still projections, right? They're just not ones that we have access to. Yeah. So I don't believe that's the case, because other people aren't following them. Like the article you just referred to, last year's, every single player I mentioned in that article going both directions. The projections were better than ADP.
Yeah, I actually just wrote an article, do my yearly comparison of projections, and one thing I noticed is that if you only followed ADP and you basically just did what the market did, you would have lost $2.7 per player in terms of auction value. If you would have followed projections, even an average projection, you would have lost only $1. Everyone loses money in an auction because there's players that jump up from the waiver wire mid-season, so what you draft is not going to be $260 worth. It's going to stay at $260. There are players that go in and out, so you expect to lose. But the projections did a lot better of not seeding as much value as ADP. So 100% in the long run, following projections work. I say that it's okay listen, it's a game here, and it's part of your fun. If you say, I really like this guy, no problem. Adjust his projection and draft to that number, and that's fine. But if you find yourself doing that too much, you're going to end up doing this and this. The ATC long-term projection is the best bet that you're going to have in the long term. And so you're not going to be able to beat the computer in the long term. Maybe for a player here and a player there and 3 out of 10 players, sure. 7 out of 10 players, you're going to be much better off by sticking with projections. And the other thing I'll say, though, about projections, and people don't understand this concept, it's more about a hit rate than it is about magnitude. To be successful in using projections, you don't have to, oh, wow, I really projected he was a $30 player, and he was a $30 player. That's not the strength of projections. The strength is, do I buy the guy at ADP? Do I actually pay market or not? Is it a hit or is it a miss? And projections on the whole do a great job of saying, yes, he will return more than the market says. No, he won't. If you buy him, he will lose money for you. So projections, and that's why ATC really works really well, is because it's a crowdsourced projection, and it really minimizes the failures of picking players. So, that's the advice about projections in general.
And we're talking a lot about, the risk, and you're talking about the cost in ADP and what have you, but I'm curious to know, as much as you want to get into it, but like, how does ATC measure the risk for individual player? And I'm jumping around on our show notes here, but I think it makes more sense to talk about this now. Whether it be job security, injury concern, a landing spot for free agents. We obviously still have a bunch of free agents out there that don't have jobs yet. We don't know where they're going to go, park factors and whatnot. So how is ATC accounting for those things? And I listed off a couple players that I think stood out, would stand out to people based on these concerns. Classic Jacob deGrom, who is, I am on the clock in that draft that we talked about earlier. And we're in the second half of the third round and deGrom's still there. Now I have to consider whether or not I want to take that risk with the injury concern with him at this spot, and I don't have a starter yet, or if I'm not concerned because all the projections are saying that he's good to go. Shane Bieber injuries, the 5th ranked pitcher in ATC. At the top of the draft, Tatis Jr. is the top overall player. Acuna's up there. Bobby Witt, without a guaranteed spot, is the top 14 shortstop. So in a 15 teamer, he's definitely starting. Chris Sale's a top 10 starter. And then we have Carlos Rodon, Charlie Morton, Justin Verlander are all coming back from some kind of injury concern, are all top 20 starting pitchers. So talk to me a little bit about how those risks are accounted for in the ATC projections.
All right, so there's a lot there to unpack, but
I tend to do that.
Yeah, all good. So what goes into, forget about ATC right now. Take, I don't know, Steamer, Zips, the Bat, whatever. Take a standard projection. They are managing, they come up with a true talent level. There's two things to projections. There's coming up with a true talent level. In a regular year, what is the guy going to do? And then there's the process risk, is to say that if everything goes right for the guy, he can achieve this. Mondesi can steal 70 bases. The downside of that is the guy gets injured. He produces 0. And you take all those possible scenarios, and the projection that you see that comes out is usually either the average projection or a median projection, and that's someone so on and so forth. Some projections will actually list out the percentiles and say, yes, here's his average, but here's what he is in the 70th, the 80th, the 90th. So the projections take account all that stuff for in terms of process risk, upside, downside. I guess they should technically take into account injury risk. Just as an aside, before I talk about ATC, you mentioned a lot of those guys, Verlander and deGrom. I don't know that projections do a great job of innings for them. I feel like all the innings that are projected for all these injury risk pitchers and players, they're just way too high. Are you really drafting deGrom as if he's a 160-inning pitcher? I don't think so. Are you going to draft Sale as if he's going to pitch 200 innings? I doubt it. But that's a side point. But the individual projections do the process risk. What they don't account for, which ATC does a great job, is managing what's called parameter risk. Just because Steamer comes up with a true talent level of a player, how do I know that's right? Maybe Zips does it better. Maybe the Bat does it better. Maybe you have your own projection system where you scout players, and that's a better job, right? It's hard to estimate what the right true talent level of a person is, and it varies by projections. But when ATC takes all of them together and weights them for historical credibility, that minimizes the parameter risk, the risk that we don't know exactly what his true talent level is. And so ATC, by taking the wisdom of the crowds, you minimize the error that any one projection could make, right? Maybe there's one outlier projection for a guy, for a certain player by a projection system. ATC will just diminish that and say, wait a minute, everybody else is saying something else. Let's take a number in the middle. And I've put out some new statistics with ATC, inter-projectional standard deviation, that actually will show you not just what the ATC average is, but how far apart projections are. So you can get a flavor of projections. Shohei Ohtani has tremendous parameter risk. ATC is showing so many different projections and what they say for what Ohtani can be. Mondesi, oh my God, what's he going to be? Whereas Bo Bichette, very small a risk. Most projections are agreeing on what he's going to be. So you get a flavor for how close projections are to each other and how much parameter risk is there. And I say that's what ATC does best in terms of risk mitigation of any, if that answer makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. And I think you hit on my kind of follow-up question that was on here as well. But I'd love you to either repeat or go into a little bit more detail so my question about projections in general, and you said that some of them will actually list this out, is that how can the average person who's looking at these projections realize the difference in the 50th percentile versus the 80th percentile versus the 20th percent, like the least likely outcome and the most likely outcome? And how can we tell which players have a smaller bell curve than others in these projections?
Yeah, so again, ATC is not dealing with the process risk. So if you're talking about the difference between can he be really streaky, can he be not, injury related and stuff, you'd have to go to the individual projections and look at some of the percentiles and the standard deviations surrounding them. But if you want to take a look at the parameter risk and, hey, just an overall, we don't know what he's going to be, you look at the ATC volatility metrics. We have inter-standard deviation. We also have inter-skew. Like, it could be that everything is very spread out for projections, but there's one really outlier projection up or down, and the skew can tell you that. If it's a positive skew, it means that there's one outsized projection positive, but most projections are lower. Positive skew is bad. I think the masses are right. So you want negative skew. So that's a way you can gauge a little bit of the percentiles, not in the exact manner that you said, but it does give you a sense of some upside and downside of the player.
This reminds me, especially because Adam just brought up making a decision on DeGrom. You had this conversation with Ron Chandler about a month ago on Beat the Shift. And for this type of player, it's a completely different conversation because you, in my opinion, correctly said this is a binary decision. He's going to be really good or you're getting nothing. It's not going to be that in-between thing. So it's just your personal decision. Do I want to take that risk?
Yeah. In the case of DeGrom, and take my interprojectional standard deviation, DeGrom is 8.2. A typical standard deviation would be something like around 3. He's much, much more volatile in what could possibly be his true talent and the number of innings and stuff like that. When you have a case of somebody who's very volatile, of what's he going to be, is he going to pitch the innings or not, health risks, you have to account for that when you price players. The example I give all the time is if you're in a mono league and you're going to bet on a free agent, you don't know what league he's going to sign in. The guy could be a $15 player or zero. I wouldn't pay $7.50 for him because you're only in 1 year, right? In the long term, sure, I'll bet on 15, I'll bet on 0, 15, 0. The average, it'll work out 7.5. But when you're trying to win the league, you need to get a little bit of a discount to roster that kind of binary risk. And it could be a nice 10% of the guy's price, depending upon how severe the difference between yes and no is. DeGrom right now is going in the second round, and I understand projections right now say he is like a top player, even at 150 innings, but the truth is that it can be 190 innings or 0, and you have to discount the price because of that risk, and it might be a 2-round discount to do that. It depends how much you are risk averse or risk seeking. But formulaically, I would take him down $5 in an auction just for that. And that might kick me out of buying him.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? You hear it all the time. There's a price for every risk that there is, where it doesn't become, or at least doesn't feel as much of a risk. If you take $5 off the DeGrom, then what you think you're going to have to pay for it, and you get him for that much, then you feel a lot better about that. I noticed a couple trends as I was just scanning through the ATC projections and in comparing some of the players to what they're currently going at ADP, and I'm looking mostly at January Draft Champions ADP, but I looked specifically between ADP 107 and 136. We see 4 strictly first basemen that are either undervalued or correctly valued as projected by ATC. That's Jared Walsh, Josh Bell, CJ Cron, and Rhys Hoskins. In that same bunch, we have 3 overvalued multi-positional eligible players who happen to also have first base eligibility, including DJ LeMahieu, Jake Cronenworth, and Ty France. So, Kevin, how should fantasy managers account for the value of position eligibility? And I'm talking a standardly, not a best ball or anything like that, when using a projection system compared to the value that they're hoping to get for the player production at that draft. How much, in your mind, does that extra eligibility bump them up compared to what they're actually going to produce?
When early in a draft or at the higher dollar amounts in an auction draft, I think the multi-positional players in those ranges, including this range you mentioned here between 107 and 136 ADP, I believe, in my opinion, that multi-positional eligibility, it's nice. It is. It's a luxury. It's overvalued. I completely believe that 100%. Some of the players we've talked about earlier in the show, part of the reason that I like them late is because of that multi-positional eligibility. But early in a draft, I firmly believe that it's way overvalued. I haven't owned DJ LeMahieu since he was with the Rockies. Excuse me, I haven't rostered him. I've never had Jake Cronenworth on a team. Ty France, I had a couple of years ago. Now he's out of my price range. So that's just the way I play it. I think it gets overvalued these days. I get it. It's nice. It does help. But I think they're valued too much just for that eligibility.
Yeah. In a regular league and a roto league with a bench, to me, the value is more of use of the bench, right? Ideally, you have your starters and they all play. And even if he could be eligible at first, second, third, outfield, and catcher, you're playing him at one position and you're drafting around that. The value is when somebody gets hurt. Now on the waiver wire, instead of buying, let's say you have somebody only second base eligible, you must get a second baseman. If you have a guy multi-eligible, when you replace him, let's say he's first and second, you can get either a first or second. So the value in a multi-positional player is the replacement level of what you can get for it opens up more positions, right? So to me, the value is if there's a big discrepancy between the replacement level of 2 different positions, it's that value between the difference, which actually is not that much because you're at the bottom of the pool anyways. So it is a help. It's probably worth $1 or $2 or $3 or $4, maybe. It's probably like $1 or $2 in an auction because what are you replacing with $1 or $2 player at the very bottom? In a best ball league, though, it's actually more helpful because you're basically having a computer calculated decision, and then your roster is more than just the full active roster. It's the roster plus bench. So that flexibility of moving in and out is worth a lot more. Mm-hmm. So in a best ball league, it actually matters a lot more. I might want to take DJ LeMahieu and jump him. But in a regular league, it'll be the point of if the guy is totally equally valued, take the guy with more positions, but I would not jump him very far over it otherwise.
Yeah, we talked about that. I think it was our first or second episode ever last offseason. The trend in ADP and the multi-positional eligibility players they skyrocket, and especially in the NFBC best ball league where all those positions count. In a Fantrax best ball league, you only get one position. It shouldn't affect it as much or at all, really. I guess you get to pick what position you want in most of those leagues, but in the NFBC where all the positions count equally, yeah, totally understand that.
Yeah, the biggest advantage for a multi-position eligible player to me, I like Ariel, I prefer auctions. And it's actually during the auction, because in an NFBC style auction, you have to draft your 23 starters. And then you can't have bench players and get your second catcher or your middle infielder during the snake portion of the reserve rounds after the draft. You have to fill 23. So if you have a couple of guys that you value about the same in the same tier, and one of them's got another position that you still haven't filled in that auction, there is an advantage to bumping him $1 or $2. It leaves you more options as the draft itself continues.
That's good. And I'm assuming, since you're also talking about the replacement level of these players and gives you more flexibility, that you would, and correct both you guys' question would be, would you bump these guys up in a shallower league or in a deeper league? So a 12 team or 15 team or even 10 team, would that type of flexibility mean more to you in a shallow or deep?
Value and stuff, of course, it depends on the format. If the replacement, if you're playing in a shallower league, you might get a different variance between the replacement level of a position. Just by the formula, it might do that. I haven't really looked to see what happens this year. I can tell you, though, in a 15-team league, there's no difference between positions at the very bottom. I'm thinking maybe for a 10-team league, third base could be a weak position right now because there's a big drop-off somewhere in the middle. So if somebody has third base eligibility, it might actually bump them up a little bit. But I don't think between the other positions this year, you're actually going to see any difference if you go shallower.
Kevin, you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. That's the way I would look at it. We talk throughout the season a lot of times about some of the outfielders available we see in Yahoo leagues. So having multi-position eligibility, adding outfield isn't going to help much. There's tons of them out there, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm more interested in the other position that they might be eligible. Yeah, exactly. Ryan Mountcastle is a first baseman in Yahoo, as far as I'm concerned. He's not.
And just as a tip to other people, the more shallower you go, it actually bumps up hitters versus pitchers, because the replacement level of pitchers, you can find a lot more viable options in a 10-team league than in a 15-team league. So hitters should be taken a lot earlier in a shallower league than in a deeper league.
So we're talking about position scarcity. So let's get in. A thing I noticed as I was looking through the ATC projections versus ADP, the ATC spits out for second baseman specifically is that the majority of them are all being overdrafted for the most part, besides a very select few: Brandon Lowe, Jose Altuve, Jorge Polanco, and further down the list, Gene Segura and David Fletcher, the only exceptions there. And if you look at third base, like Ariel just mentioned, it's even stronger trend of players being overdrafted. Every single third baseman that I saw, except for Josh Donaldson and Justin Turner, further down the list, are being overdrafted. So, Ariel, what sort of weight do you think drafters, or are you putting on those specific positions versus getting the value of production at that pick that they're making?
Yeah, again, it comes to how you do your valuation. And if you do it correctly, you should find that every position, you should be indifferent to getting any player. A $5 third baseman is the same worth as a $5 second baseman. What happens, though, is because the market comes up with better prices for certain positions or not, you have to find what are the pockets of dollar value, what threshold do you find the biggest bargain? If the biggest bargains that you can find at first, maybe first base has more undervalued players than third base this year, find out where the biggest bargains at first base happen, and that's where you attack first base. Find out where the biggest differences are between second base, between value and market, and where you can get the most profit, and attack second base there. And even if everybody's overvalued in third base, that's okay. Just find where it's least overvalued, and that's where you would attack it. So it's not about bumping up positions or the other. It's just giving you a guide to know where to find the value at what point on the curve. Is it high? Is it medium, low? And then you get a list of players that are going to be roughly in the same area. And like you mentioned, all those guys, Polanco and Lowe and Altuve and whoever, that might be a spot to attack second baseman. And there might be another spot to attack starting pitching. And it's just about finding where the pockets of value of each lie. And that's where you attack them.
Kevin, are you waiting positions at all going into drafts? And we did a podcast a long time ago with Myles Nelson. We basically just argued whether or not we should be taking best available pitcher or best available player, or if we should be building our roster based on, need and value and what have you. And I drew the short straw on that one, and I had to argue on the behalf of best available player no matter what. And it's not typically how I would draft. I'm going to build a roster based on what I need. And if I have to go up or down on value at that pick to fill a specific hole, thinking that there's going to be a drop off later on in the draft, I'll make that difficult decision when I have to. But have you changed your opinion on that strategy based on the overall valuation that we're talking about with these players?
No, not at all. And it's the whole drafting backwards thing that we hear a lot about, and sometimes it's harder to follow through on than it sounds. Or as far as bottom up pricing, as far as our auction goes, like you just mentioned Josh Donaldson and Justin Turner. I would be perfectly happy having either one of those guys as my starting third baseman at the value that we're getting against the market right now, as Ariel would put it. The issue is you have to have a backup plan. If you don't get them, you got to, one, try to make sure you're getting one of those guys. And two, if I don't, what's my backup plan? Now in an auction, you can try to sneak one in early to know you have it. Sometimes you don't have to go along with we're going to nominate Mike Trout and Fernando Tatis and Jacob deGrom. You can try to sneak a guy in early to know you've got that. And then that really helps you going forward in auction. And Ariel talks about all kinds of psychology of auctions. I love listening to him talk about that. In a snake draft, bump them around. If you're getting a good enough value on them, bump them around. Make sure you get them.
Yeah, and you talked about bottom up, and it really is about seeing where players are going for and where the value is, as I mentioned. One of the first decisions, if you're picking early in a draft this year, is do I go with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Jose Ramirez, let's say? They're both, the ATC projections actually value Vladimir Guerrero more than Jose Ramirez, okay? So it's not about bumping up exactly value. I'm comparing the value, and Vlad is projected for higher. But I think that I can get a better first base bargain later. I might be able to get a $7 bargain later. Why would I want to pay par value early on? But third base, maybe because there's not that many bargains later, I have to pay par value later. If I have to pay par value later, I might as well pay par value on top and take a Jose Ramirez. And then I'll take the first baseman for a $7 bargain later. Same thing, like Freddie Freeman to me is acceptable in an auction this year. But if you're in the late first round, early second round, even though his value comes up as Freddie Freeman is the next guy, I don't know that I want to take him at roughly value, even $1 bargain, because I can get a first baseman for $7, $8 later by picking later. So it's more about finding where the bargains are, and then you map, okay, it's good to take a first baseman in this round. It's good to take a third baseman in this round. It's not good. That's the way you got to play it, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Just knowing that just because a player is valued at the pick that you're picking him at doesn't mean he's the right pick at that time. Right. You just don't want to get too far off of that value with whatever pick you do end up making.
Yep.
So we talked about, Kevin, you mentioned it, about building from the bottom up in the draft, as we hear about it all the time now. And that leads into, we have a couple of mailbag questions. We don't get a lot of mailbag questions, so it's nice when we get a bunch. And of course, I announced that we're going to have Ariel Cohen on the show, and everybody has a bunch of questions.
In. Yeah.
Even though these are all questions based on, Kevin, I'm going to ask you this question first. This comes from Alex at AJT126 on Twitter. He's curious, and I'm going to paraphrase, how are you using projections for players at the end of your draft compared to the front end of your draft, since you aren't necessarily drafting the quote unquote 50th percentile at the end of your draft? You're willing to take more risk that they're going to produce maybe a higher. So how are you using projections there, or do they become less important?
No, I just use them differently. And it's what we talked about a couple of times throughout the show. Towards the end of a draft, I'm looking for if there might be a realistic reason that someone will get more playing time than what they're projected to get. And as the closer we get to the season, some of these things become more apparent. and their ADP reflects that. But sometimes there can just be something. I use the example all of the time. I think I used it a couple episodes ago, a couple years ago when Jonathan VR left Baltimore. I noticed that all of the projection systems had the plate appearances for Hanser Alberto to be the same, but I really thought he was going to lead off, and he did for much of the season. I adjusted his playing time. That's the kind of thing I look at. Then you look at the projections on a per plate appearance basis, change those plate appearances, and they move up in the rankings quite a bit. So that's what happens for me later in the draft. Earlier in the draft, yeah, I'm looking more at what the projections tell me.
Yeah. In general, at the end of the draft, you want to draft the higher upside guys, or I'm not even going to say higher upside guys, the more volatile. Like, is he going to play? Is he not? You don't know the situation. The simple answer is that because at the bottom, if they suck, you cut them, right? If I ask you, Kevin, what's the average between 10 and 20? The average is?
15.
What's the average between -10 and 10?
0.
But if you're cutting players off at 0, if they suck and you cut them,
right,
then you're not actually
doesn't come into play, right?
Yeah, it doesn't come play. The average is not between 10 and -10, it's between 10 and 0. It's 5. Whereas if I took a player who's literally 0 and he doesn't have a very upside or downside, you're getting 0. So you're much better off at the bottom taking guys who are up top. I work in insurance, and the old adage there is, if your company is in a hole, if you're about to, you're going to be in bankruptcy and you're looking for some investment to get you out of the hole, you're not picking a safe investment. You're picking a wacky, crazy, hey, what if we hit investment? Because if it doesn't, you're screwed anyways. But if it does, hey, I'm right back in business. Riskiness is better when you're closer to the bottom. Always true.
I like that analogy. That's real life advice that we're getting here on the show for a change. I appreciate it.
Hopefully not real life for you that you're in bankruptcy.
You never know who's listening.
Hopefully it's not decisions we have to make.
Yeah. All right. We had a participant in our listener league. That's Pauly P at Pauly P72. He wants to know, how are the initial projections are made with free agency still pending? I think we touched on this a little bit with the risk, as well as how did you account for the potential or the expected universal DH across Major League Baseball?
All right, I'll answer the second one first. The projections that you see right now, by and large, account for having the NL being a designated hitter league in there. I was actually, most people don't know this, I was actually the guy who convinced all the guys on Fangraphs, all the projectors, to switch over. All the projections and playing time are all there, and I guess I'm the I don't know, overseer of projections, the whatever you want to call it in the industry, or at least on Fangraphs, I don't know. But I basically said, hey, it's the most likely outcome. Can we all switch over? And everyone agreed. Sure, let's all switch over. So as they did that, I was able to, with my first cut, just go right into that. Are there some projections in ATC that still account for an NL not having an NLDH? Sure, it's less weight than most, so you can basically use ATC as having it. As far as free agents, though, this happens every year, and in the start of around January, you're always going to get playing time for hitters somewhere like around 10% more than what's possible. If there's 45,000 at-bats that is in a typical year, you might get 50,000 at-bats come out of ATC or any projection system. Pitchers, it's even more. You get about 20% extra playing time. And then as free agents get signed and more battles get settled and all, that number goes down. So ATC would only be 4% over in hitting and 8% over in pitching and all that. But that's it. You're not actually projecting a real-life situation. You're not saying, let's take exactly the number of innings. At least that's not what I do. You take the right number of innings, and you have to ration it off, because I'm making a judgment and I'm projecting on a per-player basis. What would be a good projection for Donaldson? What would be a good projection for this player, for Yordan Alvarez? I don't know, pick anybody. I'm not saying, well, what's the Houston playing time? Then divide this. I'm not doing that. I'm looking at averages, and I'm making the best guess on a gambling basis for each player. And if it means that it's not a real life answer and I get more playing time for in general than that can theoretically be, I'm fine with that. And to give you another great analogy, since you love analogies here, right? It's the elevator analogy, right? Suppose you're in the hotel lobby and there's two elevator banks and they're 15 feet apart. The button is there and you don't know what floor each are on. You press the button, you don't know which one's going to come first. Where do you stand? Do you stand in front of elevator A, hoping that it'll be there? Do you stand in front of elevator B, or do you stand somewhere in the middle? Which one?
Middle, obviously, right? The middle, yeah.
I play this game with my daughter, so we both choose one to see who's right.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. But you stand in the middle because that's the best guess you have. But of course, you can't get on in the middle. It's not a real answer, right? It's not a real possibility that this is where you should stand. You can't get on there. But yet it's the best answer because minimize the variance of where you go and travel time and all that stuff. So you can have answers in life that don't exactly translate to the right thing, but yet it comes with the best gambling answer. If I was going to gamble on a place to stay with the elevators, I'd gamble in the middle, even though that'll never happen. So there you go.
Follow up real quick with a question about updates. You talked about how you'll make updates throughout the offseason as players sign and as different things happen, spring training, what have you. How many updates are you making to the projections throughout the course of the season, or if any? Or are you just, once the season starts, that's what everybody should be expecting?
Once opening day starts, peace out. I'm out. I don't do a middle season. First of all, I use a lot of projections that are only available preseason. It's a different model. I guess I theoretically could, but so far I haven't yet. Maybe this year I'll do a mid-season just for the fun of it. Let's see, and publish it. But through the preseason, I'm updating it like once a week until March, and then 2 or 3 times a week during. It's funny, like people ask, what do you update for? And as Kevin said, you shouldn't update rates. It's for playing time. Like you mentioned at the top of the show, Gregory Polanco is no longer playing in the U.S. Actually, I just looked at the ATC model. It's projecting 300 plate appearances for Gregory Polanco. Obviously, that did not hit all the other projections. So that is one example of a manual change that I will do. I will now overwrite that, and his projection will go down to 30. Just 10% chance he'll come back here. I don't know. But I'll actually manually update for that. That's where the manual updates come. So I thought that was interesting since you guys mentioned it.
I'm glad you looked that up. I'm glad we could help out.
Thank you.
All right. And so the last question we got comes from Lamont Williams, also in one of our listener leagues, at Lamont A. Will. He simply wants to know, what are some of the biggest surprises? And you touched on this before, Ariel, that you're looking into your own projections as much as anybody else is at this moment. But so far, what have been some of the biggest surprises that you've seen come out of the ATC projections, maybe compared to what you thought you might see? You're an avid baseball fan. You're an avid fantasy baseball player. So obviously you already have narratives in your head and you have an idea of what players can do and should do compared to what actually ATC spit out.
It's Gregory Polanco.
Yeah.
Sure.
That was a big surprise.
I do follow baseball, and I am an analyst, so there's nothing that comes out that, oh my God, what the heck is this guy doing? Occasionally players will pop up, which I didn't know about, or, oh, really? That guy is positive value. I saw Jose Miranda, positive value for the Twins. That looks interesting. I have to follow up on that. I'll say that Miguel Sano looks really good. Oh my God, really? Why aren't people buying him? Guess they're afraid of the batting average, but overall value, he looks great. Sandy Alcantara looks really poor. Everyone thinks he's the next Messiah, but he's good, but he's not as good as people think. Huh?
I hope Nick Pollock's not listening.
Yeah. Sorry, Nick, but this is what ATC says. That's a surprise. But yeah, nothing life-altering, but those are just a couple of spots that on the first glance, that's what I saw.
Kevin, how about you? Have you had a chance to dive through it and have anything stood out to you?
I haven't really dove into it, but just glancing around, I think one of the things that sticks out to me the most, and it's something that we really have to wrestle with, especially when we're talking value. And that's what Ariel is all about. He's all about value, right? Is how high or how much value many of the players that don't contribute in the stolen base category have. We have to weigh that. Like, we have to get those stolen bases somewhere. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr., all these guys at the top, that value wise, they're worth more money. So it's hard to weigh that and decide where are you going to get your speed.
All right. So if you guys haven't out there had a chance, make sure you are diving through the ATC projections. We are going to round out the episode with some actual player discussion, and we're going to I put together some player battles, if you will, compared to where they're going in ADP currently, also compared to where they're going recently in January draft champions drafts, comparing those things to what the overall ATC rank. And I took this by throwing ATC projections into the auction calculator on Fangraphs with the standard 5x5 format, standard NFBC roster construction. So pretty standard stuff just to spit out a number. So this is not exact science as far as quote rankings go, but it gives you a good synopsis. I'm going to hit on a couple of these battles. From the first group is going to be players that currently have a higher ADP than their ATC projection rankings. And they've also seen their ADP drop over the course of the offseason. So their value in drafts have been going down. So earlier in October and November, going higher. They're going earlier in drafts. I'm going to start saying earlier and later. That's way better than higher and lower. A lot less confusing to myself, at least. First one, we'll start with DH, because there's not a whole lot of them in general across NFBC at this stage of the game. Franmil Reyes started off with around 117 ADP, has recently in January has seen it dip down to a 142, has ranked 71 according to ATC projections overall, versus Nelson Cruz, which is the old adage, he'll always be underdrafted. 169th overall ADP has been going down to 186 in January drafts, 97th ranked in ATC projection. So Kevin, if you are willing to spend the draft pick on a DH only player, of these two guys, which one are you more likely to jump up to match the ATC projection to their current ADP?
In a very high percentage of the drafts I've done, I have one of these two guys or Shohei Ohtani. So I do not have Nelson Cruz on many teams. I did take him in the auction I did in Arizona. I got him for $5. I couldn't believe that. And recently I love this value on Franmil Reyes so much that my DH spot is filled. So then I can't take Cruz. And in one of the drafts I did, you took Franmil, so I couldn't. So I am all about this pair of players right here. So
if like I said, he's dropped down to 142. His ATC, there was a big jump to 71.
Yeah.
Are you willing? So great at 142, but how willing are you to get closer to that 71, that ranking? Like how much are you willing to jump him up to make sure that you get that value?
So far, I haven't had to. That's the whole point, right? I've taken him in the 10th round. I might have jumped up 9th round in one draft, but 9th or 10th round is where I've been able to grab him. If he starts getting pushed up, the problem is the way I draft, I'm not taking pitchers early. So I can't bump Franmil too far, because then we get into the rounds where I'm taking my pitchers. But this is a 5th round value here, so you should be more than willing to go in the 7th.
Ariel, are you one that tends to stray away from filling your DH spot with a specific DH player, or either of these guys on your radar?
Yeah, having a DH player and a DH spot is fine for me. If the value is there, the value is there, and they usually undervalue these DHs because people just don't want to take it, but I'll take it, sure. You don't want it, just good for me. I don't really play that way, though, I have to take them. Should I take them a round earlier or 2 than ADP? I don't really play that way because I can get a guy 2 rounds lower than ADP. I look to see what the best bargain is at the time, and okay, I have to take this guy now because there's a better bargain later in this position. Like, I'd rather do it that way than say, got to jump him up to take him. I don't look to grab anybody. I list the players that I think are going to be helpful to my team for a slot, and I'll get who's available, whoever the biggest bargain is there. But I mean, to answer your question, between the two, I think it's Franmil. Hopefully you guys aren't in the same league as me, but to snipe him. But yeah, Nelson Cruz has the added risk of, is he going to play? Of course, he could have said that every single year for the last 10 years, and we've been wrong. At some point, he's going to do it. And I happen to like Franmil. I think that Franmil, he has the upside. We've seen him hit almost 40 homers in a year. And to be honest, I think he's a better batting average hitter. The hard hit rate that he produces should have a better batting average effect. He's shown better batting averages in spurts. He's very streaky. The strikeout rate bothers me a little bit, but I feel like he's better than these projections for batting average. If I believe any one projection versus the other, I actually believe the Franmil over the Cruz. So I think he's the better value per ADP of the two.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Franmil. If for another reason that there's a much stronger possibility that Franmil walks into outfield eligibility going a month or two into the season, if the Guardians give him the opportunity to do that and fill a hole where Cruz.
Guardians. That's the first time I've actually heard that on a podcast I was on.
There you
Holy
go.
cow. What's a Guardian?
And then Cruz, I think he started one game at first base, like his first start ever in Tampa Bay. So it'd be pretty surprising if he gained anything outside of that util eligibility across formats. And we're not talking about just, I'd be very surprised if Cruz has anything except for DH only in Yahoo for that matter. And everybody knows how flexible they have been. I'm going to skip the number 2. I'm going to go to the outfield, and the two guys here are going neck and neck in ADP, whether they're going up or down, and they're pretty similar in the overall projections as well. Of course, that's Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees. He was going at 87 throughout the course of draft season, has dipped down in January past the 100 mark to 108, ranked 46th overall by ATC. And then JD Martinez of the Red Sox, the 84 overall, dipped down to 99 recently with a 53 ranking according to ATC. So Ariel, I'll start with you. If you're looking for that to fill that outfield, that part of the draft, which one of these two guys are you more confident that will fit into that projection versus where they're currently going in drafts?
Doesn't JD Martinez remind you of Nelson Cruz like 8 years ago? Isn't it like the same thing? He's Nelson Cruz. He's just super solid. Stanton is not that much younger. Stanton's 32. Not that much of a difference. Everyone thinks, JD's an old guy. He's not that much older than Stanton. JD Martinez consistently hits for a high BABIP. It's not like a fluke every year. He really, this is his true level. The run production is crazy for JD Martinez. He's much more stable than Stanton. You're dealing with injuries constantly. With injuries, you can say a fluke injury, maybe he'll be better this year. But Stanton has soft tissue injuries, hamstring, strains, quad strains, those are recurring. If you ask any medical professional, those are recurring. It just happens to be. If the pitch hits you and breaks your wrist, it's a one-time deal. It heals, and that's it. Like Freddie Freeman's been struck by those injuries, no correlation to the next year. Stanton, it's 100%. It also depends on what the log jam is at DH with Stanton. Will he get all the playing time? Who knows? I'm not a Stanton guy. I think per at bat, maybe Stanton, but overall, I think JD is the better pick between the two.
Kevin, do you put any stock into the Stan's doing yoga now? He's fully healed, right? Yeah, yoga. Him and Aaron Judge are doing yoga now. So now
my wife also does yoga, so should I pick her over Stanton?
It's possible. If you can get her into the database, I'm sure that could be a possibility. Do you have the same mentality, or the upside that per plate appearance that Ariel talked about with Stanton, is that a little bit more?
No, I agree with Ariel 100%. I've been tempted a couple of times on Stanton. Steamer liked him as well. And so he's been sitting there in my rankings in my queue round after round, right there on top. But I have not pulled the trigger. It's too early to take that. What I brought up earlier that I think Ariel would refer to as a binary risk there. He could miss a lot of time very easily. So it's too early in the draft to take that risk for me.
All right, I'm going to jump down to second base because I alluded to it a little bit earlier in the show. There's a whole lot of second basemen that are getting overdrafted. There's two guys currently right now that are actually rarely second base that are being underdrafted. So, Kevin, I'll start with you, and that's going to be a battle between Brandon Lowe and Jorge Polanco. So Lowe was going overall 76th. It's dropped down to 84, so not that much of a dip in January. With all the kind of like back and forth hype on Twitter, I actually thought that number was going to go up or get drafted earlier, but not so much, at least in January. But an overall ranking of 49, so top 50 player by ATC standards. not Gregory Polanco, but Jorge Polanco being drafted overall at 79 spot, dipped down to just the 83 spot. So pretty flat there. But his ATC value at 60, of course, Polanco with the stolen base upside there and Lowe with the power upside there. Which direction are you going between these two guys if you had to make that decision?
This is in an auction. I'm going to be all over Brandon Lowe if this value remains. The narrative with being a Tampa Bay Rays, he's not going to get the plate appearances. He got over 600 of them last year. So I'm not worried about that. I like this value with this projection. Unfortunately, I don't have either of these guys on any of my rosters. As with a couple of questions ago, this is the area I've been taking pitching.
Ariel, do you have a preference? Are you going, again, I'll push it in the direction of what they can actually bring to the table, Polanco's stolen bases versus Lowe's power? Are either one of those swaying you, or are you in the same boat, at least in drafts, that Kevin's talking about?
Well, I'll answer the question, but before that, you guys ever see the League episode where, I've seen it a long time, I can't remember the character's name, but they call up one of these fantasy experts and say, who do you rank more for this week? Who do you rank higher? I need a rank. I need a number. You know what I'm talking about, that episode?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just a personification of what we get all the time. Anybody who makes rankings, it's all, yeah.
And these guys are back-to-back in ADP. It's the same price, same cost. So the answer that the show was basically saying is that who knows who's going to be better? They're ranked there. Like, they're the same ATC value. They're the same ADP value. It's the same player. And rather than dissect, I'll give you an answer, but rather than dissect it, you should really be prepared. I call it a hotspot. When you have a couple players, hopefully not just two, hopefully there's 4 players or so who are same position, very similarly valued, very similarly priced, all for bargains. It honestly doesn't matter who you take. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because you're going to get the lowest price possible. If guys all have roughly an 85 ADP, that means on an average they're going 85. Sure, somebody can jump them up to 75, but sure, on the other side, somebody can go and drop them to 95. There's always going to be somebody. If you have 4 guys who are priced that way, there's going to be somebody at 85. There's going to be somebody there at ADP because there's more than one person at that level. It's a hotspot of a couple of people. So one of the people will be at ADP. All you got to know is just find the hotspot, find the 4 people, and don't jump up a guy around earlier. Wait till 85, and you take the guy at 85 for the bargain. And if it's Polanco, great. If it's Lowe, it's him. It doesn't really matter. So procedurally, the answer is it doesn't matter. But if you really press me in and say, gotta pick a guy, the answer is Polanco. Polanco has a better distribution of statistics, meaning he because he steals, he does hit for power, he gets a lot of runs. He's more distributed in his categories. So if you're filling out your draft roster, you're better off with him because you can replace the homers a little bit easier, lower down, and the batting average is outstanding. The contact rate on Polanco is enormous, so he has a very high floor. I have much less of a risk of him crashing down to 0 than the other guy. So for that reason, if I had to pick, it's going to be Polanco. But I'm happy to get either of them at the price. And as I said before, it's not about being totally right in the right magnitude. It's making a right decision. Is it a yes for Polanco at this price? Is it a yes for Lowe? You should be happy to take either of them and smile when you come to the draft.
This is not something I think anybody should be straying away from on a turn. If you want to go back to back with these two guys, I think that's perfectly fine. Obviously, Polanco has the dual eligibility as well, so you have a lot of flexibility with these two guys. They don't have to put them at second base.
Sure.
All right, let's touch on these. I got a couple of first base battles here, and Ariel, I'll start with you. We'll start with the upper battle, and that is Josh Bell versus Ryan Mountcastle. Bell overall going at 123 ADP, but most recently dropped down to 135, but has an 89th rank by ATC. Mountcastle obviously has the outfield eligibility to go along with first base. Overall ADP 99, dropped down to 110 this month, but has a 75 overall ATC ranking. So does the added eligibility for Mountcastle play a role in this for you, or are you looking at the value jump that Bell provides? And this goes into our previous conversation about obviously eligibility playing a role, but obviously that jump in value, Bell is going to provide you a little bit more. Mountcastle is pretty close, but where do you put these two guys?
The outfield eligibility just makes me compare him to other outfielders, not to other first basemen. That's what I would say. That's really the way to compare it. And the other thing to point out is everyone says they're going to be moving the fences back in Baltimore, so he's going to have fewer home runs. And that's true. And his value will drop. And that's true. But so will his ADP. If everyone who's playing the game in a high stakes level understand that. If you're playing in a home league, the answer is that you should probably not touch him because somebody will be up there. But if you're playing with some shrewd guys, I shouldn't say that. You could have very shrewd guys in your home league. But if you're playing with a bunch of guys who don't know what they're doing, then you're not going to get him. If you're playing with the guys who do know him, his value will also drop. And it's going to probably drop at the same rate as his real life value will drop. I think that the value proposition is still going to be there. But that being said, I like Josh Bell better. Josh Bell, to me, his contact rate is enormous. I think that, and his walk rate is enormous. He's been a little bit unlucky with some BABIP. He's put it together before. Like in 2019, he had a 277 average and 37 homers. And that was a pitcher's park on a crappy team. So I think Josh Bell has more upside. I think that his contact rate makes him more stable and less risky. And so for that reason, I kind of like his value better than Mountcastle. I think we do have to wait to see how far the ADP drops for Mountcastle, whether he'll be worth it. And again, there could be better values for first base later on. But just from these two, I would say Bell's the better value per ADP.
All right, we'll talk about later on. Kevin, I'll just drop down to the next battle for you. We call the secondary first base or corner infield battle. In most scenarios, that's going to be between Frank Schwindel and Bobby Dalbec. Schwindel, overall ADP of 228, only dropped down to 235 in January. It's pretty much right in line, but has an ATC ranking of 190, about a 40-point swing there. Bobby Dalbec, overall ADP of 230. Again, staying pretty flat at January ADP of 241, but ATC ranking of 173. So a little bit right around the same amount of value in comparison to the ADP. Which one of these guys do you think is more likely to fill your corner infield slot based on the value that they are probably providing at this spot?
I think it's Schwindel, and that's when I think about what is likely for the Cubs and for the Red Sox. I think it's more likely that Schwindel plays for the Cubs on a daily basis, most if not all of the season. And there may be some questions about that for Dalbec. So that is the only reason. Otherwise, they're very similarly valued here. And I've been taking a look at them in the spot. But Schwindel, I think, is probably a little safer for playing time.
Yeah, in that Cubs lineup, you can't imagine. I know they went out and got Stroman, but I can't imagine they're going out to get a new first base.
That did throw me for a loop. Otherwise, I'd be even more sure about this one.
All right, let's jump down real quick and talk about some players that have a lower ADP or they're getting picked earlier than their overall ATC projection rankings. And I've also seen their ADP rise over the course of the offseason. They've been getting even hotter in drafts. And so basically getting even more overvalued compared to ATC. And the question about these guys is basically, are they even a consideration? Are you still jumping them up the way that the market has been compared to what ATC is putting out? Or because of their rise, are you just completely staying away? First off, a couple of guys that are going at very different parts in the draft, but they are your targets for speed, and everybody has them because you need to have them. Cedric Mullins, overall 29, January ADP sticking right there at 29, but ATC ranks them dropping down to 67. The aforementioned Adalberto Mondesi, overall ADP of 62, ADP in January is right around there at 55. Value at ATC says it's at 132. And then Myles Straw, everybody's favorite Twitter conversation recently, 138 overall ADP with a January ADP jumping up to 112, but ATC ranking dropping all the way down to 223. So over 100-point swing there. So Ariel, are any of these guys on your radar regardless of what their value is, or is the value alone completely keep them off your radar?
First of all, I don't agree with what you said, the ATC rankings for Myles Straw. I think I have him quite a bit higher than you said, what, 200 and something?
Yeah, let me look up.
I have him as the 149th player, according to me. I definitely don't agree with that number there. The answer here is straw final answer. So there's problems with the other two. There's problems with all of them, but with Mullins, you're paying for last year. You're paying for, oh my God, that guy could be great. Sure, he could be, but for every 10 times somebody shows this ridiculously outsized thing that he's never done, had a career year, 8 out of 10, that was the career year, and they regress totally. Even, like, how about Marcus Semien, who's, oh my God, right now, after he put that fantastic year up a couple years ago, zoop, went right back down the next year. You overplay, the next season you underplay, or you play. So I think Mullins is quite a risk to see that he's going to repeat. Mondesi is, if you listen to anything I do, Adalberto Mondesi, the thing is that he is such a big categorical risk to your team. If you're drafting him, you got to assume that he's going to have some kind of 40, 50 stolen bases, which means that the rest of your roster, you're going to be drafting not stolen bases because you have it there in the bank. You're going to be focusing on power. And what happens when he gets injured? And he will. He's had the soft tissue problem. He's going to be injured for some time. What's going to happen? Your category balance is so askewed, right? Category risk is where if the guy gets injured or hurt, what happens to your profile of your categories is going to be out of balance. I always bet the under on Mondesi. He's great in a short term, but you got to pay for it. So I don't like his value there. I think Straw is undervalued for stolen bases. I think he's a guy who could steal 30. Who is playing on the guard? Yes, I'm going to say it. The Guardians. Nobody. He's going to be the guy. Mondesi does have some people. I guess if he's up, he'll play, but Bobby Witt for short, is he going to be at short? The one thing I'll say about Mondesi, I've said this before, is that Bobby Witt does project to be a third baseman by most scouts, yet they've shifted Mondesi over to third to basically make room for Witt to come up at short. What does it tell you about what the Royals think about his long-term prospect, Mondesi? They probably don't have entire confidence that he can hold down seasons, even though he is the better shortstop than Witt. So for that reason, the Royals don't trust him. Why should you? There you go.
Kevin, I think those are, I don't know if they're shots fired per se, or at least directed towards you. I know that there were reports that Witt would be competing for the third base job during spring training. Kevin, any extra insight into that as the in-house Royals reporter?
Dayton Moore says Mondesi's going to get days off and he's going to play some third base. He didn't say he's going to be the full-time third baseman. So they are doing some things to attempt to keep him healthy. I agree with everything Ariel said. With that said, I have drafted Mondesi one time. Again, Ariel, you and Ron Chandler talking volume drafters. You might want to take a shot on somebody like this. So I have, right. And it was in the league. I think we were still off the air when we talked. I started a draft thinking, oh, I may just be punting stolen bases. Yep. But Mondesi kept falling. I was like, maybe I'm not. And I snagged him. And so that could turn out to be a really good team or not so good at all.
Yeah, I felt good about seeing that pick because I ended up having to pick Mondesi in one of the other listener leagues, but I ended up picking him. I think I picked 97. And so he just kept falling. I was in one of those leagues where you had 12 people who felt the same way about the same player, and everybody just, I don't want to make this pick. I don't want to make this. Fine, I'll make the pick.
And the thing about Mondesi is that you got to be careful because at the end of the year, let's say Mondesi, oh my God, steals 60 bases. Are people going to then say, Ariel, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about? The truth is that, no, remember, it's process risk with him. He could stay healthy, he could not. Of course, they didn't come to me last year and say, Ariel, you said don't draft Mondesi last year. Man, you're a genius. You don't get the credit for that.
But
the truth is, it's just a probability distribution. I think that the cost doesn't reflect the variability that's with him, and he could have great years. He does have a little bit of power. He could have a great year. I think it's just the risk of doing that. Of course, he's not a good baseball player. He doesn't have a great high OBP. So at some point, the steals are in jeopardy. He also runs quite a bit per time he's on first base, like historic highs. Oh my God, every time he's on base, he runs. That can't stay forever. There's a lot of issues with, is he going to be that good? So I just have a lot of doubt with him, and I don't think the price is right for him. Definitely he's better in a draft than in an auction, because I think in an auction, people are just completely overpaying for him.
All right, we're going to hit on 2 more battles, and you know what? I'm just going to cut out any possibility of us talking about pitchers is out the window, regardless of whether or not we are a Pitcher List Podcast Network show or not. So we have 2 more hitter battles here. Second base battle. This is going to be between Jazz Chisholm and Jonathan India versus Tommy Edman, who, you know, I'm sure most people are drafting as a second baseman and with a possibility of moving him into the outfield slot if necessary. Jazz had been going historically at around 81, has gone up to as high as 70 in January, but ATC has them at, if please correct me again on any of these, Ariel, at 165 overall. India, 96 ADP, only has jumped up to 92 in January, but with a 121 ATC ranking overall. Edman, 85 overall ADP, 78 in January, but a 142 ranking for ATC. And so, Kevin, I'll go with you. Like, of these 3 guys, based on the valuations that we're seeing from ATC projections, have you been drafting any of them? And do the projections sway you in any other direction?
I have Tommy Edman on one team, and I didn't feel good about it after the fact, but it was a play just for the stolen bases, and I won't make that again. And I haven't even considered the other 2 where they've been being drafted.
All right. That was, I like the honesty there. Ariel, first of all, are my rankings correct on any of these, or any of them look really far off? I understand the strong was obviously a typo, because that was a big difference.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But he still fit the model of what I was getting through. Yeah. But are any of these guys, same question, like, all right, were any of these guys, do you think any of these guys would have been your targets, and did the projections sway you in a different direction?
No. Jazz Chisholm is, to me, was going the 5th round or some crazy thing like that. No. Goodness gracious. I'd much rather have Mondesi than Jazz Chisholm. He reminds me of Jazz Chisholm, the old statistics of Chris B. Young, where he's just on the cusp of 2020 with a piss-poor batting average. He has shots where he gets those and he's a value, but with crappy average, and then he just doesn't make it and loses playing time. I think this is like recency bias where, yep, he came up and he was great, so he's a superstar. I don't think so. He had a good first month or 2, and then he stunk after that last year. He's completely overhyped. 20 steals? I wouldn't even count on it. I think that Jazz Chisholm is a bad thing. I think Jonathan India is quite a lot of promise. I think Edman is so super stable, and he steals. I'd be happy to get any one of those 2. Depends where you are in the draft. I don't really have a preference versus those 2 guys. Maybe Edman a little bit. India's still a little bit new, and Edman's done it for a little bit longer. But I think the answer is anybody but Jazz.
I'm not going to say the site, but there is a projection out there. It's not one of the Fangraphs projections. I will say that. The Jazz Chisholm is projected for a 281 batting average, 29 home runs, and 29 stolen bases.
Yes.
And I called my buddy who has him for $1 in our keeper league, and I told him to call everybody that doesn't look at other sites and offer him up in trade right now and dump him right now. While that is, while when they pulled up that page, that's what they see.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, Kevin. Oh, goodness gracious.
I just saw that today, and I started laughing as I was talking to him on the phone, and I was like, oh, trade him right now.
But people will go by one projection systems. You're going to have these stupid things that come up. That guy's a 30-30 player. That's higher than like Cedric Mullins. That's hot. What is that? That's like a first round player, right?
That's what I said. If he hits 281 and does, that's a first rounder. So trade him right now.
Yeah, that's sorry. I'd say that's a joke, really.
I'd like to cash in, please, and I'm going to go to a different table. All right. Then the last hitter battle we'll hit on then. A couple of miscellaneous guys. They don't really, for position-wise, they don't match. But that's Trent Grisham and Ke'Bryan Hayes. Grisham overall ADP was at 140, but has jumped up to 132, so about around 177 ranking by ATC overall. And then Hayes at 141 ADP with the 131 January ADP, but an 185 ATC rankings. Again, position out the window, Kevin. Have either one of these guys been a target, and even around these current ADPs, and do the projection or the ATC rankings sway you if that's the case?
No, this is about where I was looking for them, is where ATC has them. They've been going earlier in drafts, so they're two players I like, but I have not drafted. It's one of those situations. I do have Brian Hayes on a dynasty team, and I'm very happy I have him there, because it's probably the only team I'm going to have him on, because I'm not going to pay the inflated cost.
Yes, you guys talk about volume drafting as well as like, and just wanting to have that one share and just take that shot on. I don't know that we're at that point in the draft here where you want to take the shot on guys. I'd rather get the guys I want and double down on those options at this point of the draft, on mega bet on those players. Ariel, are either one of these guys of interest to you at these valuations, or are you be happy with them if they dropped, or are they some guys that are just completely off your radar?
And these guys are going not so far off par value, right? They're just a little bit more expensive, I think, than ATC's projecting. Yeah, I have no problem really taking either of them if they drop in price a little bit. Between the two, they're really similar in terms of overall value. They both had health risks last year. If anything, the Grisham health risk is a little bit more serious, because that was a hamstring and a heel and stuff like that, whereas Hayes was just a wrist, and it was just, we said earlier, like that could be a fluky thing. Hamstring you got to worry about, especially the speed guys, right? There's good points for Grisham. They usually batting first in a lineup in front of like Tatis and company and Machado. That's pretty helpful to your value, right? I think it really depends on who's available then. It's also what position you need at the time, third base versus outfield. On the whole, I'm really indifferent towards the two. Maybe Hayes a little bit more. I'll prefer, only because of the health risk, but it's super close. It's one of these that I'm going to cop out and say whoever falls lower is the answer.
Yeah, whoever falls closer at least to that ATC projection valuation.
No, they're not far off, though. They're pretty close to par. Maybe they're a round or two going earlier than I would say. Not terrible.
All right, I think we've talked enough about these battles, and I think we've grabbed as much time from Ariel as we probably should. You guys haven't had enough talking about Ariel. You should be listening to the Beat the Shift podcast as well. Subscribe to that wherever you're listening to this podcast. But Kevin, I'll let you end it out with any other words of wisdom that you might have going into, as we get closer and closer to heavy draft season, to March draft season.
Yeah, just one thing, and we've talked about it throughout the show a little bit when we were talking about players. Mainly earlier in the show, we're really looking at playing time projections, and that's a big deal and a big topic of discussion throughout this offseason. I think we all feel like we could get more at-bats, we can get more innings pitched. But if all 30 teams are playing on a day, and we have an LDH, and there are 0 platoons, there's 270 hitters playing that night. And in a 15-team league, we start 210 hitters. We're not going to nail that. So that's what Fab's for. That's what we're going to go on throughout the season on this show for. Take a chance on some of these guys that may only be projected for 400, 350 plate appearances. And the in-season work is where we're going to get our extra at-bats and innings.
Yeah, with all the focus that's on at-bats and innings, like you mentioned, like whatever you need to do to get those at-bats. And I think that's a great call out, that all this prep is great, but it's how you manage your team in season that's going to make a big difference. I think that's going to do it for us. Ariel, thank you so much, man, for, taking time, a lot of your time, and I appreciate that. Could you remind our listeners where they can follow you, listen to you, read your work, et cetera, moving forward? And if you've got anything besides the ATC projections that you're working on, or if you're taking a nice long break.
It's not enough to have the ATC projection.
Yeah, I know. Keeping.
Yeah, no. Listen, we're constantly working on stuff that I'm working on a risk article that's going to talk about how to use some of these projection volatility metrics and stuff like that. So look for that to come out soon. We'll do some overvalued, undervalued players from ATC. So with the standard stuff that's going to come out, and that when we dive into all the player stuff that's going to come out soon. I write over at Fangraphs, the Rotograph section. I write for CBS Sportsline and Rotoballer. All my projections are up on all 3 sites, so check them out 5 times a day on each of them. That would be great. And do listen to my podcast called Beat the Shift, presented by Fangraphs. It's a show that we focus on strategy, that it's not just about the players, which is important too, but it's about how you play the game. How much should you spend on fab? How quickly should you drop a player? When should you hold a player? What is more efficient? And stuff like that. Stuff that you just can't get anywhere else. So check it out. And on Twitter, I'm at ATCNY. It's only 5 letters. I'm the shortest Twitter handle in all of fantasy baseball. Isn't that awesome?
That's a feather in your cap right there. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a comment the other day that somebody asked me for whatever. They asked me for like my Venmo or something like that, and I was just like, it's just at Adam Howe. How'd you get that? I'm like, it's just the first one to do it. I just got it in early. So it's
how many Ariel Cohens there are? I know 4 of them. One of them's a girl.
Yeah, just got to get in there early. Didn't have to add the 1 or the 4 to the end of any of my social media accounts. All right, that is hopefully our final quote out of place episode. As this comes out on a Wednesday, we'll be going back to our normal Sunday schedule starting February 6th, and that we will welcome NFBC or avid NFBC player John Fish to the show, talk about volume drafting and transitioning from draft and hold leagues to fab leagues during the draft season. That episode will kick us back into our weekly schedule, so you should be expecting those to come out on a weekly every Sunday, as you may have expected during the last season as well. So look forward to hearing Kevin and I's voices together with various hosts throughout the course of the season to give us as much advice as possible, both during pre-draft season and during the season with fab. That is going to do it for this episode of On the Wire. You should be following us up on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod, and there are amazing episodes coming out throughout Pitcher List Podcast Network on the Pitcher List feed. So make sure you are checking that out every single day and following at Pitcher List Pods to find updates on every single one, including our very own FSWA Baseball Podcast of the Year finalists, Hacks and Jacks, hosted by Joe Galena and Scott Shue. So congratulations to those guys for that extremely, as they put it, they are officially or unofficially the Rookie of the Year podcast, based on the fact that they're also going up against some heavy hitters in that category that have been in that category many times in the past. So good on those guys. Congratulations. Make sure you're listening to them and everybody else on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. It's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hastings Kevin. And also make sure to follow at Pitcher List Pods to get updates on all those other podcasts that we're talking about. Thanks once again to Ariel Cohen for joining us. And on behalf of Kevin Hastings, I am Adam Howe. With that, we bid you goodbye.